Welcome back to Royal LePage Binder's History of Windsor and Essex County. In our last video, we covered our past from initial settlement in the area all the way to the end of the War of 1812. Today, we're picking up right where we left off and spanning 120 years to 1935. Today's episode includes gangsters and rum runners, the Underground Railroad, a military invasion of Windsor, the construction of the Ambassador Bridge, the birth of a city, and so much more. We have a lot to cover, so let's get right into it. Following the end of the War of 1812, our region settled into a time of prosperity, growth, and peace, with one notable exception. The mid-1800s saw many revolutions and rebellions against the British style of government. In southern Ontario, there was a self-proclaimed government group known as the Republic of Canada and a secret society known as the Hunters Lodge, who collectively called themselves the Patriots, and they caused the short-lived Patriot War. The first battle began on January 8, 1838. The Patriots had captured the schooner Anne and sailed it all the way to Fort Malden. Reaching Amherstburg the next day, they stationed 300 men on Boblo Island and started shelling Fort Malden from the schooner. The Canadians responded with heavy fire from muskets and cannons, which damaged the ship and forced it to run aground, ending the assault while the troops on Boblo fled to the U.S. On February 22nd and 23rd, the Patriots invaded both Fighting Island and Pelee Island. However, they were poorly armed due to their weapon shipments being intercepted by the Americans, and both attacks were quickly repelled. The final battle in the Patriot War would occur in Windsor on December 4, 1838. The Battle of Windsor was their Hail Mary attempt and began when 500 to 600 rebels captured a ship in the Detroit River and landed in Windsor under the cover of darkness at 2 a.m. Before the sun had risen, the Patriots set a barracks on fire, burned down other buildings and a steamship, and killed several people. By 1:30 p.m., the militia from Fort Malden arrived, routing the Patriots. Their defeat in Windsor marked the end of the Patriot War, with many of the participants banished to Australia. The end of these rebellions led directly to the Union of Upper and Lower Canada on February 10, 1841. The events in Windsor and Essex County contributed greatly to the birth of Canada as we know it today. At the same time, there was a monumental social and cultural shift occurring in the Western world. In 1807, the British government began the process of abolishing slavery across its empire. However, abolition would not occur in Canada until 1834. Due to slavery still being legal in the United States, the Underground Railroad was born, a network of secret routes and safe houses for slaves to escape, of which Windsor and Essex County became an important final destination. It is estimated that between 30,000 and 100,000 people escaped along the Underground Railroad, many of them passing through or settling in our region. One of the most important sites is the Sandwich First Baptist Church. This church was originally a log cabin and was the first stop in Canada for many passengers, but was rebuilt in brick in 1841. Its importance has led to visits from several important historical figures, such as Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, Frederick Douglass, and more. Amherstburg was also an important site along the Underground Railroad. Described as the principal terminus of the Underground Railroad of the West by abolitionist Levi Coffin. At its peak, it is estimated that as many as 30 escapees were crossing the river into Amherstburg each day, with a large percentage putting down roots in town. On June 19, 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation came into full effect across the U.S. at the end of the Civil War, signaling the end of the need for the Underground Railroad. In the late 1800s to the early 20th century, commerce, trade, and industrialization launched our region into an economic fervor. This led to the development of Walkerville and Ford City, two of our area's most famous districts. Walkerville was founded by serial entrepreneur and Canadian club whiskey baron Hiram Walker in the mid-1800s. Hiram Walker was a Detroit native who began his business ventures in Windsor when he noticed the potential for growth and opportunity. He had both a distillery and a flour mill, and he developed the town of Walkerville in order to support those businesses. Everything was self-funded. He paid for the water, firefighters, police, the repairs of the streets and sidewalks, the music hall, the streetlights, everything. His goal was to make Walkerville a model town across the world. So, he became Walkerville's mayor, created a town council, and ran it like a proper town. By 1890, his efforts were successful, and the town was officially incorporated. Although Mr. Walker died in 1899, the legacy of his business ventures lived on, some even in notoriety. During the Prohibition era of the United States, from 1920 to 1933, Canadian Club whiskey became Canada's #1 illegal export. With a distillery located on the banks of the Detroit River, it attracted the attention of criminal organizations all across the U.S. Most famously, the Purple Gang out of Detroit, who dealt a huge amount of Canadian Club whiskey to none other than Al Capone. Almost 75% of all illegally imported liquor crossed the Detroit River at the time, and business was booming. Between Windsor and Detroit alone, there were an estimated 16,000 to 25,000 speakeasies and clubs. The organizers and smugglers of alcohol across the border were known as rum runners and bootleggers, and it was one of the most lucrative trades in the region. One of the most famous bootleggers of Windsor was Harry Lowe, whose legacy still stands in Walkerville today. The Devonshire Lodge, also known as the Lowe Martin Mansion, named for its famous owners, Harry Lowe and the 21st Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin Jr. Whiskey wasn't the only economic powerhouse of the region either. In 1904, local entrepreneur Gordon McGregor formed a partnership with Henry Ford and launched the Ford Motor Company of Canada. It assembled the final vehicles from imported components, and the town, now known as Ford City, developed around the factory. Between its inception in 1903, its official incorporation as a town in 1913, and incorporation as a city in 1929, Ford City went from a small little village known as Sandwich East Township to a bustling, prosperous neighborhood of over 16,000 residents. Riding the wave of post-World War I prosperity, one of the most iconic landmarks of our region was built, the Ambassador Bridge. Developed to improve trade between the United States and Canada, upon its completion in 1929, it rapidly became the most important trade route in North America and remains as such today, moving over $400 million in goods across the border daily. Despite the growth and prosperity that we saw in the early 20th century, the Great Depression began in 1929. Unemployment in our area spiked to almost 30%, and every government, business, and individual felt the pain. The economic hardships forced the province to step in as the towns and cities were struggling, and in 1935, Windsor, Ford City, and Walkerville were amalgamated into the city of Windsor. This amalgamation set Windsor and Essex County on the path to become the place we call home today. In our next episode, we will be covering our past all the way up to the present day. There was so much more that we wanted to talk about in today's video, but we just didn't have the time. Do you know of any great historical stories from here? If so, be sure to leave a comment so others can hear too. Royal LePage Binder is Windsor and Essex County's real estate brokerage, and we can't wait to see you again.